If the heart of a man is depressed with cares, the mist is dispelled when a woman
There are
appears.
many words which can be used to
Under the
describe George
mistletoe,
Washington:
she
leader,
sweetly,
general,
sweetly
statesman,
raises her skirts,
farmer,
and
surveyor.
charms our
But in
ears.
all these descriptions, it seems
Martin,
rather hard to think of Washington as being that
where I
of a
met my
Lothario or Casanova.
sweet
Indeed, the prospect of
Casanova,
Washington being romantic can seem as if it is a foreign concept.
Sentimental
Everyone is aware of his marriage to Martha Washington, but their courtship was brief and limited. In his youth, Washington was described by some onlookers as a man who was silent to the point of arrogance. Considering how awkward and nervous young men can be around women, could anyone truly blame him? Were the sins of a shy teenage boy meant to haunt him forever? Who could have had the ability to capture the heart of a man who stood a head taller than the rest of his peers? It is a very difficult question to answer, and yet history provides many different possibilities. One of the first women to claim that honor was Lucy Ludwell Grimes. It is believed Washington became infatuated with her from between 1749 and 1750, when he is maturing from being a young teenager into a young man. At this point in his life, he was beginning to establish himself and might have seen an early marriage as a possible stepping stone towards greater things. He had recently begun working as a surveyor and was already friends with the Fairfax family and had been introduced to the governor of Virginia, Robert Dinwiddie. In a letter written to Mary Carey, Washington confesses for having a revived passion for, quote, your lowland beauty. Historians have argued greatly over who the identity of this individual was. Other potential candidates for the honor include Mary Bland, Betsy Fauntleroy, and Anne Auerbach. However, the speculation of the mysterious beauty being Lucy has been argued by some who have seen Washington doing other events later in life to prove that particular connection. One of those connections was the way in which Washington treated her son, Harry Lee, more famously known as Light Horse Harry Lee. During the American Revolution, Washington offered a great deal of favoritism towards the young cavalry officer, and there has been those who believe that this favoritism was offered primarily because Washington was remembering that past time in which he had a feeling of romance and love towards Lucy Grimes. Whether or not this is true is uncertain, but for Lucy, she would marry Henry Lee II and become the mistress of Lee, Sylvania in Prince William County. While historians will continue the debate over the identity of the lowland beauty, there is no debate about the woman for whom Washington assuredly gave his heart to for the very first time, and that was Sally Carey Fairfax. First meeting in 1748, the relationship between Washington and Sally has often been discussed and debated. How close were the two? Did they have a torrid affair? Was this more of a young boy's crush on an older woman? Sally was 2 years Washington's senior. Whatever the circumstances were behind Washington's attraction to her, the relationship between Sally Fairfax and George Washington is one which is ripe for interpretation and innuendo. Being a young man who did not know the social graces of 18th century Virginia, the Fairfax family took in the young man under their wing to educate him on how he was to act and behave as a gentleman in Virginia society. It was Sally who taught Washington the skills necessary to interact with women. From her, he learned the social graces and how to dance. From surviving letters, though, it appears as though Washington may have found the courage to tell Sally of his feelings towards her. What her reaction to his declaration of love was, we will never know. It is clear that we see in Sally some of the unique attributes in which Washington was attracted to when looking for a potential wife: flirtatious, intelligent, sophisticated, attractive, and wealthy. Although Washington's affections towards Sally Fairfax would have resulted in his reputation's downfall had he pursued them, there was another woman who caught his eye and could have become his wife. Her name was Mary Philipse, and she was a wealthy heiress living in New York City. She had inherited from her father an estate, which was a rather sizable amount of land, being a little over 31,000 acres in what is present-day New York, situated between the Hudson River and Connecticut. In 1756, Washington would make the acquaintanceship of Mary, and the two appeared to be a good match together. At the same time as this budding romance was occurring, the colonies were fighting a war against France and her Indian allies on the frontier. For Washington, this meant he would be out of communication with the rest of the world while serving on the frontier. Through a mutual friend, surviving letters show Washington was being kept informed as to what was going on with Mary and her feelings towards him. However, while Washington was away at war, there was competition for him, as a letter had been written to Washington warning him of a known ladies' man, Roger Morris, who was soon to visit Mary. Ironically enough, Roger Morris would win the heart of Mary and her hand in marriage, but in 1757, the game was still afoot. Why was it then that Washington, who had seemed to want to pursue Mary Philipse, would rather give her up? The answer comes from a series of dates and how the arrival of news may have determined the course of history. On July 8, 1757, Daniel Parke Custis passed away from a suspected heart attack, leaving behind a widow and 2 small children. More importantly, Custis died without a will, which entitled his widow to 1/3 of the property as her dowager share. This meant the widow Custis suddenly found herself the richest and most eligible woman in Virginia. The date in which the letter warning Washington about the impending arrival of Roger Morris to the home of Mary Philipse was dated July 13, 1757, a 5-day gap. When this letter arrived in the hands of Washington, and when the word of the passing of Daniel Parke Custis got to him as well, is unknown. It could be reasonably argued then that Washington had received the news of Custis's death first, and then began to make plans to pursue the recently made widow, rather than pursue a woman who was hundreds of miles away from Virginia. Considering his options, the choice to begin pursuing Martha Custis becomes a rather easy decision to make. First, Martha is from Virginia. This benefits Washington, as he is well known throughout the colony and does not need to establish himself or a reputation as has already been done. If, however, he did decide to pursue Mary Philipse, he would forever be a stranger in the North, attempting to establish himself within the elite circles which existed there, and never being assured that his acceptance was fully well made. Second, the wealth of both women were well established, but Martha had the advantage of not only bringing her dowager share to the marriage, but, for a brief period of time, the entire Custis estate. The wealth generated from this would allow Washington to have the success he was desperately looking for as a young man. Third, Washington would be well aware of potential rivals for the hand of Martha Custis. Unlike his potential competitors in New York, Washington would know that he was a significant person within the boundaries of Virginia. His fame and notoriety had been established and recognized throughout the colony for over 5 years. This would make him far more appealing as a potential husband as compared to those who would flash their wealth to awe the widow. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, Martha Custis had a great deal of charm. The exact date of when the two first met is unclear, as historians have argued their first meeting could have been any time between 1752 and 1758. If the two had met prior to 1757, Washington could easily have found himself charmed by the young woman. Could this enchantment have lasted for an extended period of time? The answer would have to be an assured yes. Historians know that the first official time for both George Washington and Martha Custis to begin some type of relationship was between March and May of 1758. The exact details of their encounters together is unknown, as any record which could shed light on it was burned in 1799. But what can be seen and made very clear is that after the first meeting between the two, Washington had been charmed once more by Martha Custis. In their second encounter together, historians argue Washington was able to get a confirmation of a marriage proposal, or at least a promise to consider marriage. By their third encounter, it was confirmed the two were engaged to be married. What could Martha Custis have said which charmed George Washington? According to some sources, the two spent more time talking about how she was running the Custis estate. Their discussions about planting crops and how to deal with English merchants provided for Washington a person who could understand the same circumstances he found himself in. This mutual understanding of what the other had to deal with helped to lay an early foundation between the two. In addition to the understanding, there was a level of respect not traditionally found between couples in the 18th century. By discussing daily problems on the Custis estate, Washington was effectively treating Martha as a person rather than an object. For her, this must have been an intriguing, if not different, way of being treated. For Washington, this was a woman who could engage him in topics he understood and exuded a confidence which other women he was interested in did not seem to share. It was through this discovery of common interest and respect which led Washington to discover the love of his life. For in Martha Custis, he found a woman for whom he could love, respect, honor, and because of her own belief in keeping daily routines, understanding the importance of family, keeping their lives united on all fronts, he found a kindred spirit, someone for whom he could actually live a life with. And for while he had his previous adventures in looking for love, the right woman for him was one for whom he could be entirely himself and not pretend to be someone he was not. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to join our Sons of the American Revolution family. And remember to come out to all the 250th anniversary events celebrating the birth of our country.